Okay, so as of now we are recording. So by staying on, you're consenting to being recorded for posterity. Welcome everybody. I'm Mattia Vaccari and I'm the eResearch Director within the DWC Research and Innovation Office. But today it's actually Library Services and Mark Snyders specifically who will be hosting. So we'd like to talk about research, data management, and without any further ado, let's welcome Mark and go through the webinar. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Mattia. So my name is Mark Snyders. I am the research data management person in the library. My official title is the Manager for Scholarly Communication. Just a few housekeeping rules. Please be aware that you are being recorded. Try and keep your microphone on mute. If you would like to say or make any kind of comment, would you please do that in the chat? You're welcome to speak if your background is not going to interfere. Please note that you're welcome to ask me any number of questions, but we do only have 1 hour, so we'll try and go as quickly as we can. Of course, we'll go as thoroughly as we can as well. In the chat function on the right, I've shared a number of documents. The first one is a Google spreadsheet. We'll get to that soon. Just a little bit further down, I've also shared a number of links. I realize it looks like one long link, but those are actually 4 documents. So the first one is, so let's just have a look. Okay, now that's gone missing. So the first document that I've shared is the spreadsheet, which is this one. And the other documents that I've included are the LibGuide, which is the document that we'll be using today. As far as the interaction is concerned, I've added the link, so you guys are welcome to have a look at it, but I'm going to talk you through it. I've also shared the webpage for the Data Intensive Research Initiative of South Africa, and I'll explain what that is soon. I've also shared, just give me a second, okay. I've also shared a checklist for a data management plan, which was produced by the Document Digital Curation Centre, which is a Scottish institution. So without further ado, let's get started with the guide. As indicated in so the link is at the top here. It is the link that I shared. So as indicated, we're going to talk about the data management plans. And the reason why we're discussing this is because increasingly funders and institutions are requesting researchers to produce a DMP or a data management plan to essentially discuss, or identify what happens to the data that you collect. Now, there is an argument with regard to who owns the research data. We won't get into that other than to say that the trend or the norm internationally is that the institution owns the data. If the funder has made it clear that they own the data, then they own the data. It is rare that the researcher, in fact, owns the data. What I will say about it is ownership of the data is actually beside the point. As far as researchers are concerned, the research or the data is available to you as long as it remains accessible. So even after your project is concluded, your data actually will still be available for you to use as you see fit. So moving on, in terms of the data management plan, the idea behind the data management plan is essentially to make sure that your data is stored securely and is accessible after your project. But the idea, before we get to the actual construction of a plan, what we need to do is to look at what the fair data principles are, because these will inform how you store and share your data and also help you understand what the data management plan is all about. So as far as the fair data principles are concerned, With regard to my guide, there are 4 boxes. We are looking at the fair data principles in the middle. And the fair data principles are fairly more or less straightforward. They are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. These principles apply to 3 aspects of data management: the data itself, or the digital object, the metadata, or the description of the object, and the infrastructure where the data is stored and shared. So moving up, data needs to be findable. So the research data that is recorded needs to be discoverable by other researchers. And applying the appropriate description makes it possible for other people to see it. Applying the appropriate description is essentially using metadata or a metadata scheme. In other words, a specific language format, or other people would call it jargon, but using specific terminology to describe your data. So people in your field would understand what your data is or what your data covers. Your data needs to be accessible. So it needs to be stored in a long-term storage facility, and as well as a recognized storage facility. And your data needs to be freely accessible and downloadable for use. In terms of the storage facility, it is important to understand that data needs to be stored in a facility where other people can access it. So this does not mean a computer at your home, or your desktop computer in your office, or even a memory stick. What we're referring to is an open access repository that is specifically for research data. And that is something that we will get to a little bit later. Your data also needs to be interoperable. What this means is that the description of the data and the data itself needs to be written in such a format that it remains accessible. In this particular case, what we are referring to is making sure that you are not using a proprietary software or software that is unique to yourself or your institution or your department or even your project. We need to be clear on this aspect, because as far as data is concerned, there have been cases where data has been written in formats where the software is either no longer supported or doesn't exist anymore. Essentially, it renders the data completely useless. Your data also needs to be reusable. So the goal is the optimum reuse of data. So what we have is data needs to be fully accessible in as much detail as possible. Well, fully described in as much detail as possible. There's no point in creating a data sheet that doesn't contain any kind of instruction that describes how the data can be used or should be used or viewed. So those essentially are the fair data principles. On the left, what we've got here is, aside from the description of the data, what we need to understand is that data has that research data can have a life beyond that of the project for which it's collected. What's important about this is we've all seen projects where data can be used multiple times and in different formats, and interestingly enough, in different fields as well. So making your data accessible means that it makes other research possible. Sometimes, in some cases, beyond any field that you anticipated, or beyond your field of research. And the idea behind the data management plan is essentially creating a roadmap so that people can find the data and reuse it. So get into the guide. A little bit below on the left, you'll see useful tools and resources. The first one is the National Research Foundation Statement on Open Access. The National Research Foundation has indicated as far back as 2015 that when it comes to research or publicly funded research, it is important for the research to be publicly available, for the publication to be available in open access format, as well as the supporting data. So in other words, the data that supports your publication or your conclusion also needs to be publicly available. This link here is for the FAIR data principles, as I've just described. This is just a complete document. We have another document here on open access and FAIR data. Here we have the FAIR data guiding principles for scientific data management and stewardship. Stewardship essentially just means the process or mechanism of looking after the data beyond the actual project itself for which the data was created. The Data Intensive Research Initiative of South Africa is a website that I've loaded into the chat function, and we'll have a look at that soon. We also have something called the DMP Online, which is an online tool to create a data management plan. In this case, we're not going to use the online tool, but we are going to go through the elements of the data management plan. The webinar just below that is essentially identifies any kind of updates that were made to the DMP Online. So let's have a look. The data curation lifecycle model is something fairly complex and far more complex than it needs to be for our purposes at the moment. So you're welcome to have a look at those at any time. Okay. We also have something here called the Registry of Research Data Repositories. This one is particularly interesting. So I'll place this link in the chat. But if anyone is interested in looking for a research, we'll do it later. If anyone is looking for a research repository other than the one that we are using at the university, then you're welcome to have a look at this page in order to help you find a research data repository. So the idea basically is a subject search area, and it will tell you which repositories are available that you can use. We won't go into that now. We're going to be selfish and work with our data repository. So at the bottom, we also have the DMP checklist, which is the document that I loaded. Well, the link that I loaded. We have elements of the data management plan, typical DMP components, and data management planning workshop. This is an online workshop. Okay, so moving forward, what we're going to talk about now is why we share research data. As far as data is concerned, it's becoming mandatory for institutions and funders. Data sharing has become mandatory as required by institutions, funders, and even publishers for that matter. And what we're finding is, as far as data is concerned, sharing data is concerned, is basically it promotes new discovery, increases research impact. Increasing research impact is particularly important because data can be published and you can be cited and can be cited. So this can add to your citation impact or your research impact. In libraries, we refer to that as your H index. Data supports validation and replication. What's important or useful about validation and replication is that if any questions arise with regard to the validity of your conclusions, your data or your research, your data can be made available publicly again, and your study can be replicated in order to continue to support your conclusions or verify your conclusions. It enhances collaboration. When your data is made public, you may find that someone in some foreign country might decide to contact you and say, well, I'd like to collaborate on a project. It will only be possible if your data really is made public and made available for someone who is interested in the details of your study. The return on public investment is fairly straightforward. Publicly funded research made public will result in new discovery and new research, and therefore return the investment in terms of the National Research Foundation in particular. It also reduces redundant research, in particular where, let's say, multiple students are working on a similar project, they can all use the same data set as opposed to each student collecting the same data over and over again. Okay, at the bottom, we have two articles here on publishing research data. or research data publishing, and they do explain what the benefits are in terms of publishing the actual research data. We're not going to look at the videos now. As far as data management, our repositories are concerned, what we have here is our UWC Research Data Repository. This one in particular, Kikapu, is a Figshare-based resource. And here I've got two videos, Introduction to Figshare and Uploading the Research Data to Kikapu. We will deal with that a little bit later. We also have a Zenodo repository, where we have a UWC community within Zenodo. And again, we have some instructions in terms of how to use it. We are going to be looking at Kikapu. As far as data management planning is concerned, on the right, okay, on the right, what we've got is the data management plans will include but not be limited to the following. So we will have a data description, in other words, what will be collected, access and sharing, how will the data be stored and access provided, metadata, which metadata standards will be used, in other words, which descriptive language will be used. We also have intellectual property rights, identifying who owns the data. For any new project, it would be the university. And you need to identify any copyright restrictions or funder restrictions. These may relate to embargoes placed on publications. Ethics and privacy issues, how will you obtain consent? How will the subjects be protected from identification, format, which format will be used, archiving and preservation, for how long, or what are the long-term plans in terms of storing research data, and are there any backup plans? We'll get to that soon. In terms of the retention period, we need to know how long you anticipate the data should be stored. For a number of people, they would prefer to have their data stored for as long as possible. For smaller projects or for projects that are time sensitive, people may feel that the data becomes useless after a short period of time. Either way, the data retention period needs to be identified. And then resources and responsibilities. What's important about this one is identifying which resources you require and who's responsible for what. In terms of resources, this refers to the types of software that you need, the types of storage facility that you need, and any other equipment that will be needed in order to collect and store the data. In terms of responsibility, the principal investigator carries primary responsibility. However, there are cases where data management or data collection is outsourced. This needs to be identified clearly. And in some cases, data analysis is outsourced, and that needs to be identified clearly, and arrangements with those organizations who do that will have to be clarified. Okay, so moving a little bit further down, in terms of citing research data, as I mentioned earlier, it increases publishing the data increases your research impact. As I said, data can be cited, which means that it doesn't have to be a particularly lengthy article. All you need to do is upload a complete data set that you are satisfied is the final version, and you can add it to our data repository, and we will provide a DOI for it. From there, the data can actually be cited, and it will add to your research impact. We've got a couple of links here, how data sets link to publications, and we have a quick guide to data citation. Okie dokie. So moving forward, we're now going to have a look at the spreadsheet that I created, which is this one. So what you can see in front of you is the National Research Foundation data template. This is the template. The link itself is in block B here. The data template essentially contains all of the basic information with regard to how the data management plan needs to be filled. So the first part is aside from the first element is who the funder is, and then the actual data itself. heading there is element and then data on the left. So in this particular case, the funder is the National Research Foundation. We have administrative data where you would list any kind of related policies. We have the data collection process, which will cover, my apologies, something's odd happening here. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so data collection, what kind of data will be collected? How will the data be collected? So in a case like this, questionnaire, internet research data will be reused from elsewhere, in which case you would have to indicate where it comes from. We have your documentation and metadata. Here we have the documentation and metadata that will apply or accompany your data. This is an explanation of what the data is and how you intend to use it or how it can be used. So the description here could include something like which version of software that you've used to create your data. We have ethical and legal compliance. How will you manage the ethical issues? And in this case, how will you manage copyright and intellectual property issues? These questions can be tricky, and so a data management plan may need more than one person to have a look at it. From my office side or from the library side, we're happy to help you with these questions or these aspects of the data management plan. In fact, we will help you build an entire plan if you need help. Okay, storage and backup. How will your data be stored and backed up during the research process, and how will you manage access and security? In terms of the repository that you are going to use, if you use the UWC repository, we will help you identify all of the details with regard to the storage facility itself, what its backup policies and plans are, and how to manage access and security with regard to the facility itself. So in terms of your data, one of the examples is that you can load something without actually having it made available publicly. So in that case, basically upload your data just for secure storage purposes. Selection and preservation, which data will be retained? Obviously, you can upload raw data, and as you refine it, you can create refined versions of it and remove older versions and eventually stick to just the refined version of the data, should you choose to do that. This is where we identify for how long data can be stored or what the long-term preservation plan is. In terms of the preservation plan, we are referring to the file format that was used to create the data and making sure that this format is migrated to the extent that it does not become obsolete. And then at the bottom, we now have data sharing. How will you share your data? In this particular case, you will share it as discussed with regard to the repository. This is the part where we can help you explain how your data will be shared or accessed by other people. And here, this is where you indicate whether or not there are any restrictions. So your funder may, for example, say your data has to be used for non-commercial purposes only, and this is something that you will record here. Your roles and responsibilities here, who will be responsible for data management? Usually the primary investigator. And what resources will you require to deliver your plan? As far as the data management plan is concerned, your resources that you require would include all of the software. Well, the plan here is not the data management plan. It is the plan to manage your data. So this is any kind of software training or any facility that you need, as well as documentation in order to manage your data. So all of that needs to be listed. This, however, is the National Research Foundation's template. What we also have at the bottom, this worksheet has got three sheets in it. The last one is the National Research Foundation template. The first one on the left is a template used by the University of Michigan, and it's a little more complex or simple. It depends on what your perspective is. So we have the element on the left, the description in the middle, and then the details will be filled in on the right. For anyone who's using or accessing this template, you can download it if you choose to. However, I did include in block B the link to the actual document itself. So again, we have a data description. We have the use of existing data where you will upload the link or the origin of the data itself, which you do there. We will have format, which will indicate here the format of the actual data itself in terms of how it was generated or created, how it will be maintained and made available as well. We have metadata, which would be the description of the data. The metadata is the language that is used to describe the data. In some cases, we have fields where we have fields where specific language and terms are being used. This is something that you would indicate here. In the case of, let's say, astrophysics or even dentistry for that matter, what you need to look at would be, what we need to look at is the description in terms of the language that is used. In the case of astrophysics and dentistry, there are specific metadata standards that are used, which people in those fields will use. It is not necessarily mandatory. Rena, I'll get to your question in a minute. Okay, so here we have storage and backup, a description of the facility itself, and the policies related to the facility. Security, which we have here, is a description of the technical and procedural protections for the information itself. This is where we will help you with regard to the repository and its policy and protocols and procedures. Here we have responsibility, so the name of the individuals who are responsible for various aspects of the data. We will look at intellectual property rights, entities and persons responsible for intellectual property rights to the data. As I mentioned earlier, as far as the data is concerned, it is owned by the university. Intellectual property rights are a little more complex than that. Access and sharing, how your data will be stored and how it will be accessed. In this particular case, you identify the potential secondary users. The primary user is the primary investigator. In this case, we will identify, or you will need to identify, who is likely to use the data, to reuse your data. Here we'll discuss, here you will add selection and retention periods as discussed with the NRF template. In other words, identifying what to keep and what not to keep, and for how long to keep what you do decide to keep. Archiving and preservation, again, requires some information with regard to the actual repository or the facility that you are using. Ethics and privacy. This is where you would discuss something like how the data will be handled. For the most part, though, when it comes to ethics and privacy, some guidance from the ethics committee is going to be needed with regard to is going to be needed in terms of adding the information here. You may, for example, want to say that a letter was issued, or you would maybe add an ethical approval letter to your data report, to your data record, to indicate that it has passed an ethics committee. Budget In this case, any kind of budget relating to not the project itself, but the data, especially in cases where you need to pay for data, as far as where you need to pay for storage facility, sorry. Data organization, how is the data going to be managed during the project? What with information about version control. In this case, what it's referring to is the different versions of the data, as opposed to, so in other words, collection of primary data and the refining of the data in different versions until you reach the final format that you're looking for, or the final document. Quality assurance in this case is something that the NRF doesn't really address, but it is something that you may want to consider. And then you have a list of legal requirements. So in our case, for example, our legal requirement is that our data is subject to the principles of the Protection of Personal Information Act. That is something that we need to remember as well. Okay, so let's just get to Rena's question. She's asked on the requirement of non-commercial use of data at many universities, staff receive some authors fund. At some universities, that can be a substantial amount. Can that be referred to as commercial use? And is it financial gain, as in terms of financial gain? Thank you, Mattia.
Yeah, well, I thought we would leave it to the end, but so I was writing my comment. But yeah, okay. I think we can take questions as they come up. So
okay, well, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you for helping me with that one. Okay, so in terms of this worksheet, going back to the worksheet, what we're going to look at is the DCC template. Now, we won't spend too much time on this one because the document itself is available. I have placed the link. I have made the link available and the PDF can be downloaded. So what we're looking at here is this is probably one of the more complex data management plans that was created. It was created quite some time ago in 2013. And as far as the Document Curation Center is concerned, or the Digital Curation Center is concerned, they essentially spearheaded the concept of creating a data management plan. This was a global initiative that started in Edinburgh and was pretty much adopted all the way around the world. It does not mean that they're the first people to do it, but they're the first people to pretty much make it public. So as far as the data checklist is concerned, this is a good checklist to check your data against, to check your plan against what is a comprehensive plan. Okay, so we have, again, administrative data. And in this particular case, we have the identity of the primary investigator, the funder, the institution, as well as something, a grant number. We have the project name, and here we have a project description. So what is the nature of the research project? What is the research? What are the research questions you are addressing, etc. So fairly comprehensive document. A little bit further down, we have things like the date that the first DMP was created. In other words, the first version of your data management plan, and then the date that the data management plan was adjusted or changed. We also have a couple of questions to consider. Something like, are there existing procedures that you will base your approach on? Does your department or group have data management guidelines? On the data collection section, which is a little bit further down, we will have things like, what data will you collect or create? How will the data be collected or created? And it goes further to quite a bit of detail. Just to be clear, that document looks like this. So please feel free to download it. It is a 4-page document, and we are about halfway through our webinar, so a little over halfway through our webinar, so we'll move on.
Mark, for future reference, is it fair to say that most of these resources are linked from the LibGuide that you
Yes,
linked
they
to
are.
at the very beginning?
Yes, they are.
So that's the crucial bit. I mean, people should take away. Okay,
Yes,
great.
I
Thanks.
agree. Okay, so moving on to the Data Initiative Research of South Africa, or Data Intensive Research Initiatives of South Africa. This one is a CSIR project. And what we're going to look at is the data management plan here, or management planning tool. In order to use this tool, what you need to do is to log in or register, and you can use the tool fairly safely. It will also archive the data management plan that was created. What I want to draw your attention to on this page is something called the public DMPs at the top and the funder requirements as well. So the public DMPs contain data management plans that were created using this platform and has a couple of details that you might find useful. If you click on the PDF on the right, you'll be able to see that the data management plan itself is in fact fairly straightforward. There are a number of questions that will be asked that you need to respond to, and you can respond to them as simply or as complicated as you like. In this case, this particular plan is just 2 pages. The template itself, which is this one, can be downloaded from the site. And it has all of the questions in bold, the sections in bold, and all of the questions are numbered. This one is the NRF template. What you can see in terms of the data management plan is that it does not need to be a complex document. Unlike this one in particular, the DCC document is a comprehensive one, and it is not prescriptive in any way, but it is quite a useful document to have at hand. Okay, so as far as the data management plans are concerned, what we've gone through is construction of a DMP, where to find your resources, how to use how to apply the fair data principles, and above all, what the checklist is. So as far as the checklist is concerned, those sections are all on the DMP worksheet. Okay. What I'd like to do now is to move over to our repository and just do a very, very quick upload so that you can see what it looks like. So a data repository, the address is kikapu.uwc.ac.za. And in order to get into this repository, what you need to do is to log in with your username and your eCanva details. Logging in with your eCanva details creates an account for you. So you don't really need to register or ask permission. It just authenticates you as a UWC staff member or researcher, and it will create an account for you. And good grief.
I think you might have to add the UWC suffix, no?
No, it's not that. Let's try this again. I really hope this works. If it doesn't work, on the LibGuide, I've got a video. Great. My apologies. I'm going to have to find yeah, maybe we do need Global Protect. I'm not sure. But as far as my password is concerned, I think the problem is that I changed my password recently, and I may just have forgotten it. Going back, as far as the video is, the data repository is concerned, one of our colleagues, Sarah Schaefer, created a video on how to upload to Kikapu. So what we've got here on the LibGuide is uploading data to Kikapu, and it explains how to upload your research data. It also discusses applying a digital object identifier or a DOI. Let's just have a look. Some people have found ways to get into Kikapu. So my suggestion would be to have a look at the video. I should have tested my password a little bit earlier, but have a look at the video. Bear in mind that as far as any assistance with regard to data management planning is concerned, I am available to help, and my details are on the guide itself, on this guide at the bottom on the right-hand side. Okay, so what I would like to say at this time is my apologies for not being able to show you the repository.
Yeah, but I just want to stress that you do not need Global Protect as Carnita mentioned in the chat. I've also double checked it and it works for me, but yeah. I should say that we're busy. Well, we're busy overhauling the whole password system at UWC, so that it is somewhat less controversial. But people have historically been having issues. I mean, when updating their password, so sometimes they wouldn't synchronize correctly across different systems. So I'm not sure whether this is the case, but we are busy working on it.
Thank you, but I think in this case, it really is the fact, it really is me and
it's the user.
In this case, it's a user problem, yes.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, so I think let's just have a look at the data at the front end, at least, of the data repository. So here we have discoveries, so kikapu.uwc.ac.za. And just to show you a little bit, as far as our stats are concerned, data that's been uploaded into our repository has now been viewed 29,000 times at least, or what looks like close to 30,000 times, and has been downloaded at least 8,000 times. We have a number of different categories. We have, what we've done here is we've added recordings of our recent webinars for Research Week and Open Access Week. But towards the bottom, we have things like research data management. We have, this one in particular is a conference contribution, but further down, we have a number of other options as well. As far as Kikapu is concerned, what we did recently was upload all of the recordings and interviews as done by Professor Fielding with regard to the coronavirus pandemic. In the case of this repository, it will play all of the media files. So moving further down, and let's just keep going. There are quite a few things that we loaded. Okay. We have had recently changes in the copyright legislation have indicated or are moving towards creative output or creative works being recognized as research output. So one of our academics has written this one, The Women of the Stone Sea. It's a book. And we also have a number of items from Professor Kobus Moelman, which are short stories, poetries, etc. The one on the right, research data, on the left, research data management in public universities in Malawi, is the reason why this data is embargoed. In other words, the file will not open, is that there are some publications underway. We have some more creative works that were loaded. This one in middle passage is a CD We have a musician attached to the Center for Humanities Research that contributed to that one. Further down, we have the Crossroads series from Connie Benson in our history department. This is a comic book series that details the history of the Crossroads settlement in Cape Town. And a little bit further down, we get to the data sets. These are data sets that were loaded either by Alison Fullard from the library, and this is data that we collected with regard to research that we conduct as the library. And further down, we have more childhood immunization, prevalence of wasting by age. So if we look at childhood immunization, what you'll see is, okay, it's still loading. At the bottom, we have all of the metadata, in other words, the description of the data itself. This set has come from the +1 repository, which is also a Figshare repository. So it uses the same platform as we do, but this is data supporting a publication. And as per the +1 requirements, any publication that is published by them, the data itself will need to be made available in order to confirm or verify the conclusions that were reached. So in this case, the data itself is made available and it can be reused for anything other than, for any other research or any other information that the data itself reveals. These files can be downloaded. The little green lock on the right-hand side indicates that this file is available publicly. Okay, that is my song and dance for today. Let's just have a look. There. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions?
Thanks, Mark. I haven't checked the chat, but I don't see a badge, so I think we don't have much there. Okay, so questions, anybody? Or requests for further support?
In terms of further support, my details are on the guide. Okay, well, that's me for today. As far as this workshop is concerned, it will be repeated on Thursday in case anyone is missed.
With improved passwords.
With improved passwords, yes, I'll be able to show a little bit more. I will certainly reset.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'll be happy to see that. I've done some experimentation with Figshare of my own, but perhaps you will show me how to do this, how to do that better on Thursday. If there's nothing else, I'd like to thank you, I mean, for this webinar, and we will provide.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
it's Anita.
please. Of course.
Hi, Mark. I couldn't quite see how you got to the data that Alison Fullard had uploaded, because when I look at data sets, it seems to give me like a different set of things. So I wasn't sure if it restricts based on which department you come from or whether you, yeah. I don't know if you can just go through those steps again of where you got to Alison, the stuff that Alison Fullard had uploaded.
Okay, let's just have a look quickly. What I did was we went to the website kikapu.uwc.ac.za and just find the data set quickly. I think I'm going the wrong way. So what you do is you click on the data set, well, the icon, and it should give you the actual data set itself that you can have a look at.
Under which category was that data set?
I'm not entirely sure. Let's just have a look. So a little bit further down where the metadata is, it will tell you, in this case, curatorial and related studies, not elsewhere classified. So in other words, a fairly unique collection. What you can do right at the top is you can search for it. So and it should give you all of the data sets found uploaded by Alison. That one in particular that we just looked at now seems not to be available publicly. So the record exists, but it's not possible to download it. This is something that you can address with Alison if you choose to. Okay, but so at the top, we have a snapshot of the data itself that was collected. And then at the bottom, we have a description. Apologies. At the bottom, there's a description of the data itself. As far as access to the data.
While you're at it, can I ask a question? I might have missed it earlier. If you click on the datasets owner, I mean, can you also get in touch?
You should be able to. Let's just have a look quickly. We have ORCID, and I don't think we should put her email address on it, but that is something that we can provide.
Oh, no, not necessarily. I just wondered if there was a messaging system integrated within it, or if people were likely, well, in the case of the institutional repository, people within UWC will be able to look them up as part of the Gmail directory, but external users will not. Of course, if you have the ORCID,
yeah. Okay, so no, there doesn't appear to be. I haven't used it to the extent where it's not. It isn't anything like ResearchGate where you can request something from the author itself, from the author themselves. Directly from within the platform. So that's not something that Figshare does. But it does, her ORCID and her contact details can be made available. Bear in mind that as far as the repository is concerned, I am the administrator. So if anybody does need any help or does need any help contacting anyone, you're welcome to contact me.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I just thought I'd ask because yeah, that's something that would occur to me if for instance I wanted access to data that is otherwise embargoed.
Yes, I'm not sure why this survey is not available, but it also depends on what who is the lady Carmelita is actually looking for. And in terms of looking for any kind of data related to UWC Library, you're welcome to contact any of us. We will be able to help you. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so thank you very much. Any other questions or comments, you're welcome to contact me directly. My email address is on the guide. And yeah, happy hunting as far as your data is concerned, or at least collecting research data is concerned.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks again, and thanks everybody. Please let us know. I mean, if this was helpful and how we can improve in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a nice day, everyone.
Okay, so I'll stop the recording.